The supernatural is a government psyop, the big bamboozle, whether that be hauntings, possessions, ghosts, cults, Satanism, all of it. It's all created. And I've told you since the beginning of this channel, since the inception of this channel, that military intelligence and psychological operations departments, in cooperation with Hollywood, which is an arm of these psychological operations departments, have been promoting the paranormal and the supernatural intentionally to cover up events that are happening, to cover up shenanigans that are happening. I want to get into that. I'm going to prove it to you. But before that, we need to understand a couple events that started back in the late 60s, early 70s, and are going on today. One thing that you need to understand is the Phoenix program. This started back in the late 1960s, and what it was basically was shock and awe. They were training soldiers who were clearly chosen because they were psychotic to go into Vietnamese territory, hunt down these enemies, and shock and awe them by raping, pillaging, setting up bodies in ritualistic ways, exactly like serial killers. Let me play you a clip from an interview with Dave McGowan from a while back.
Classic example of the latter would be a guy like Arthur Shawcross, who was a Phoenix program assassin in Vietnam. Like 43 kills, which were, just these barbaric crimes that he committed that, involved, rape and mutilation and leaving bodies on display and, all the stuff that serial killers traditionally do. And that's very typical of the Phoenix program, the serial killer phenomenon, which really bubbled to the surface in the latter years of the Vietnam War, was kind of a case of the Phoenix program coming home. Because the Phoenix program was a torture, terror, and assassination in Vietnam that was specifically designed to strike fear and demoralize the Vietnamese people.
So what you had was all of these things starting at the same time. You had the Phoenix program. Within a couple of years, you suddenly have serial killers in America that didn't exist before, not like this. Pretty large coincidence to swallow. The Phoenix program is being covered up by psychological operations. They want you to think that it's Satan, that it's cults, that it's this, that it's that. Let's go to Operation Gladio. Now, Operation Gladio is like a UN, a NATO operation. And what they do is they target civilians with this same kind of shit, with 9/11 type shit, to get you to come to the man for safety. Here is a interview with a guy that talked about it a while back. You were supposed to attack civilians, women, children, innocent people outside the political arena for one simple reason, and that reason was to get the people to come to the man, to come to the state and ask for security. This is happening everywhere. This is a NATO operation. Operation Gladio was a NATO UN-style operation. Whether that be Gladio operations being depicted as cult shit, whether that be serial killers being depicted as Satan worshippers and demonically possessed people, to voice of God weapons and the people that hear these voice of God weapons, and all of this being blamed on demons, the paranormal, to get people's minds to focus there. For those of you who don't understand, I have a lot of videos on my channel, but I'm trying to get you acquainted with everything going on in the late 60s and early 70s. Right then was in the middle of MK Ultra and mind control experiments, where they were working on all this so that they could ultimately go wireless with everything they were doing, like psychic driving, repeating messages to people. And their intent was to control people, to get someone to do something against their will or against their better judgment, like this.
The goal remained the same. As this CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation.
They have found that the best way to do that is to convince these people that other people are going to hurt them, or other people are doing something bad to them. And they are hypervigilant, they are in fear for their life, so they go after that person to save their life. And they use voice of God weapons on these people. You are essentially programming a person to believe that someone else is doing this to them. So they may gear up and go after them for revenge or to save their own life. And that just depends on the person and the script. There are only about a dozen scripts. They're like Mad Libs. They just add something, change something. Very minor details are changed. It is the same script over and over and over. Replace demon with God, replace God with demon, replace demons with aliens, replace aliens with ghosts, replace ghosts with angels, replace angels and ghosts with your neighbor doing it to you, replace the neighbor with a coworker, replace the coworker with a family member, keep going and going. Do you see what I mean? It's only the small details that change. It's Mad Libs. The scripts are all the same. If you realize this and you look at all these cases, they are always identical in almost every way. And they get them to do insane things, just like every shooter that you've seen in the past 20 years. And longer. This has been going on for a long time. But now it's gone gangbusters. Full-on gangbusters. But how do you divert? How do you deflect? How do you project and hide the fact that all of this started at the exact same time? Serial killers, people hearing voices, mental illness evolving and morphing into what it is today. How do we deflect? We get you looking at all of this in a completely different way. We distract you with a hand puppet over here. So instead of people thinking, what's going on here, man? We got these serial killers popping up, mental illness is morphing and changing, the symptoms are changing. We've got people that are hearing conversations, sometimes more than one person is talking to them, and voices started giving people commands. You give them two options. You give the science people mental illness, and you give the rest of the population The Exorcist. Now in this video I'm going to talk about both The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3. Mainly The Exorcist 3, but the original one laid the groundwork to scare the shit out of people and put this into the minds of people, and this was a psychological operation. First off, who wrote and directed The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3? It was William Peter Blatty. He's just some artist that makes movies, right? No. He is not. William Peter Blatty is a Psyops guy. Flat out a Psyops guy. I'm not making that up. When I tell you that the paranormal is promoted by military Psyops, I am not playing around. Who and what was behind the Exorcist movies? William Peter Blatty, the writer and director of The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3, is the U.S. Air Force's psychological warfare policy chief. The U.S. Air Force's psychological warfare policy chief, and he is the one planting these ideas. The ideas that scared the shit out of an entire nation back in the early 1970s. He didn't come right out and talk about voice of God weapons and shit like that back then. It was just Captain Howdy.
You really don't want me to play, huh?
No, I do. Captain Howdy said no.
Captain who?
Captain Howdy.
Who's Captain Howdy?
You know, I make the questions and he does the answers.
This psychological warfare mind rot laid the foundation for everything to be blamed on Satanism, possession, everything that you see today that is ramped up. And coincidentally, we have Coke and we have Pepsi. We have the paranormal for those who believe, and we have psychology and psychiatry for those who believe. And the similarities that they find between possession and a psychological breakdown or being schizophrenic are remarkably similar. Strange. There's no one in the middle. It's Coke and Pepsi. It's a perfect grift. It's the perfect cover for everything that they are doing. But in 1990, Blatty made The Exorcist 3 and was able to successfully fuse psychiatry and the church, the Catholic Church, the paranormal, and all of these ideas together into one concentrated Coke and Pepsi Psyop to catch you with a net no matter what side of the fence you fall on. And he went in hard. And he basically told you exactly what was going on. Because there are key details to The Exorcist 3 that people do not pay attention to. By 1990, Blatty didn't have to play around with ideas like, Captain Howdy and all this crap, and demons and Ouija boards. In The Exorcist 3, Blatty takes on Voice of God weapons completely and puts Voice of God weapons throughout the movie. So what is happening is there is a demon hopping from people to people. But if you look at it correctly, everyone in the movie is being controlled by one entity. And it takes place within the Catholic Church and within a mental ward. And this is what psychological operations people do. They prop up something like this, ghosts, demons, mixed with psychology, and then they give you little tidbits underneath. So, in the very beginning, the detective who was trying to track this demon that is hopping from person to person, this detective has a dream. And in this dream, right away, we get our first hit. Herbert Mullen heard the voice of God. John Linley Frazier heard the voice of God. Since then, countless people have heard the voice of God. There are hundreds of videos that I have talking about this. Let's check out this dream.
Sir, come in, please. Can you hear us? We are attempting to communicate. Come in, please.
The living are deaf.
Now, why would the psychological operations chief put that little tidbit into a movie, right? But it gets way heavier than this. The detective is friends with a priest. I'm not going to go through the whole movie, but the priest is murdered by somebody in the mental ward because the demon keeps hopping from person to person. This old woman allegedly came in and killed this priest somehow, right? And this doctor points out who it is, and they have a little conversation. Let's check it out.
There's your girl over there.
My name is William Kinderman.
Yes. What about my radio?
Pardon me?
I said my radio. Aren't you going to fix it?
She needs her radio fixed. It's very imperative that you listen to details in this movie. There are many, but listen here.
I'm the radio repairman, Mrs. Gladio.
Well, fix it.
Oh, what's wrong with it?
Dead people talking.
So the woman, the Manchurian candidate, is hearing voices through the radio.
It's right here.
Here is the biggest clue. While everybody's distracted with demons and insane asylums and everything else.
Do you see it?
Yes, I see it.
I just knew you weren't really a radio repairman. That's a telephone I'm holding. It's all right. A lot of people wouldn't know the difference either.
A lot of people wouldn't know the difference either. A lot of people wouldn't know the difference between a radio and a telephone. Do you understand what he's saying there? These people are all listening to the radio. They're hearing voices. A lot of people wouldn't know the difference between a radio and a telephone.
A lot of people wouldn't know the difference either.
A lot of people wouldn't know the difference between a radio and a telephone. These are tiny tidbits that no one is picking up. It's all throughout the movie, but people don't pay attention because they're too distracted by the demons, the ghosts, and the insane asylum, the theatrics.
You're the radio man.
Yeah, that's right.
That radio isn't mine.
It's a constant theme.
Mine is newer.
It's back in the details. It's a nugget of information that you need to look for. Right after the radio incident and talking to the old woman, the detective comes out and he realizes that the quote-unquote demon, the entity, the influencing entity, is hopping from person to person in the insane asylum. Now watch what happens here.
Friends. Old
friends. I'm a traveling man, one who moves. Old friends, one who moves, one who moves, one who...
So they're all being controlled by the same entity, just like Voice of God weapons. It's actually quite brilliant. Now watch this.
I didn't mean it. Say it again, will you?
And there's another woman in the corner talking to a radio.
I didn't mean it. Say it again, will you? Yeah.
Now, the entity has turned this woman into a Manchurian candidate. And she kills a nurse, steals the uniform, and breaks out in order to go on her mission. This is a Manchurian candidate.
Bill, what kind of a nurse is this?
So this entity is hopping from person to person. It's the same entity. It's just amazing that in between all of this, these props of psychiatry and the props of demons and possession and the supernatural, he put these little tidbits in there.
I just knew you weren't really a radio repairman. It's all right. A lot of people wouldn't know the difference either.
There's a reason why that's there. Mainly, all people are seeing are ghosts and demons in the Catholic Church and a bunch of disturbing imagery. And they're not looking at the little nuggets in there. Brought to you by the U.S. Air Force's Psychological Warfare Policy Chief. If you're not getting this, there's something wrong with you. And this is just one example out of hundreds, out of thousands of psychological warfare units in Hollywood using this type of propaganda to get people to blame shooters and crazies and serial killers and all this on demons, to get you thinking about, Satan and cults and demons and ghosts and supernatural and blah, 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 blah. When a light bulb blows up in your house, it is not technological. It's not something pulsing on the grid. It's ghoulies and ghosts. This is how they keep people thinking this way. And it's a fact that it's being put out by psychological operations. So, the public doesn't notice the radio talk, the little details that look really big when you isolate them. And otherwise, it's Catholic Church, demons, and an insane asylum. But let's go beyond that now. Let's get past the insane imagery that they look right past. The Joel Peter Whitkin Psyop art. Disgusting artist. Let's go beyond that. And let me show you something that puts this all together and puts it in a damn blender. I was talking about the Phoenix program in the beginning, and all the Gladio operations done by NATO. Who was obsessed with the Exorcist 3? 2 to 3 times a week. A week. They watched it over and over. They were obsessed with it. Who was that? It was Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, there's something about the Dahmer case that you need to understand, and that is most of what you've been told in the past, through Netflix, through the news, through the 90s, through the 2000s, most of it is bullshit. Dahmer is not who you were told he was. Dahmer was surrounded by very, very strange people in the military and even before the military. This does not happen to ordinary people. When he was in high school, his class went on a trip to Washington, D.C. He hopped on a payphone and made a call and told his friends that he had secured them a private tour of the White House. Now, we're talking about Gladio. We're talking about the Phoenix program, picking out nut jobs.
Ducked into a phone booth at one time and made a call, told his friends that he was going to arrange a private tour of the vice president's office for them. And, they were naturally skeptical, thought he was full of shit, but he made the call, and sure enough, he got him in not only just to a private visit to the vice president's office, but also to a private visit to the office of a very high-level columnist, Washington columnist at that time, whose name I can't remember. It's quite obvious that your normal average Midwestern kid going back to Washington, D.C. on a visit cannot make a quick phone call and secure a private tour of the vice president's office. It's just, That doesn't happen in the real world. This guy obviously had some kind of high-level family connections.
And Dave McGowan is absolutely correct there. You don't just call and get a private tour of the White House unless your family is somehow connected. But Dahmer was obsessed with The Exorcist 3. He thought it was written about him. He identified with it. He saw this character that was driven by this inner evil force, and he felt that he was being driven by this inner evil force. How weird is it that you have this movie that is written by the chief of psychological warfare, and one of these ex-military fucking psychos happens to be obsessed with that movie. And it goes so far beyond this because even the guy that bunked with him in Germany, who was attacked and drugged and raped and tortured and lived to tell about it, he tells a completely different story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Billy Capshaw was in Germany with Dahmer. They were in the same room together. They were bunked. And that's how they were connected. He was basically forced and basically imprisoned with Jeffrey Dahmer, and they kind of kept him with him so that he couldn't get away, almost like Capshaw was a test subject for Dahmer.
Did you ever see Dahmer meeting with anyone, privately meeting with anyone, or?
Well, there was some guys with suits that came to the room, but I don't really know who they are. I'm thinking they were American CID. The military knew that there was a problem even when I got there. No one wanted to room with Jeff, and I don't know what to think about it. I mean, I really was afraid to say anything. I mean, they talked to him. I went outside.
Now, that sounds more like he was a test subject. They were allowing to live like that. And you can see this with CIs, confidential informants, people like that are kind of in the same ballpark. They'll get arrested for things, but they never get convicted for it. Charges are always dropped. They're quietly let go. Dahmer always slipped through the cracks, It's like they were waiting to unleash him on the population.
You know, the room and stuff like that, and then they left. I mean, that was pretty much it. They had suits on. I don't know what they were talking about.
This is a photo that was allegedly sent to Billy Capshaw by Dahmer. And it's a guy that he was with, and they're wearing Israeli army fatigues. Dahmer mailed the photo to him at his family home in Arkansas, and Billy thinks that Dahmer also shot it. It's very strange that they are wearing Israeli army fatigues because they were allegedly involved with an operation called Operation Moses. So in 2010, a Jerusalem Post story review, Operation Moses was a clandestine airlift, a three-way collaboration between the Mossad, the CIA, and the Sudanese state security to smuggle about 8,000 Ethiopian Jews from Sudanese refugee camps who had arrived to escape a famine. Dahmer was involved with this. Now, put this all together. This kid, as a kid, gets a private tour of the White House. He's in Germany doing some type of military intelligence with these people. Here's where it gets really weird. When Dahmer was finally, arrested in Milwaukee in 1991, Billy was also in jail because he was really messed up. He was really messed up after the Dahmer experience. Military people in civilian clothes arrived at the jail and told him that if the media ever asked him about Dahmer, don't mention Israel. Dahmer has a much different and richer history than we are aware of. Billy told author Jay Norris about his visit to his room from two guys in suits with non-military haircuts who demonstrated survival techniques in extreme conditions. He assumes they were CIA or something like that, and Dahmer had acted like he was friends with them. He had a prior relationship with them. That's very, very interesting. These are the autopsy reports of Dahmer's victims.
What could he discern from there? What could he tell me that hasn't been reported? Again, Billy was a paramedic as well. He saw that Jeff apparently kept his victims alive.
Russell, he kept them alive. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed what he did to me. He kept them alive with a thoracostomy tube, a breathing tube. He severed the spine at certain areas, many of his victims, so they couldn't get away or couldn't move or couldn't whatever. One of them had a tracheostomy. You know, it's all crazy. And there's another thing called a cricothyrotomy. And he knew that stuff better than anybody, as well as a physician probably. I got tied to a bunk, given drugs, all that kind of crazy stuff. Somebody, and I think you know who I'm talking about, had trained this guy.
Somebody had trained this guy.
Somebody, and I think you know who I'm talking about, had trained this guy. He was not a regular guy, a regular 18, 19-year-old kid.
Do you hear that?
He was not. Okay. He had many years of training. For his age, I don't see how he had that much knowledge.
For his age, I don't see how he had that much knowledge. This is where it all comes back together. These movies, these psychological operations go out, and the public is totally influenced by it. Satanism, ghosts, paranormal, blah, 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 blah. Even aliens and Bigfoot and all the bullshit that goes along with that. Jeffrey Dahmer, who was military, already started out kooked, right? And then gets totally bent by his military handlers, if you will, right? He even becomes obsessed with The Exorcist 3. Even he has been psyoped during the psyop with the evil force that he believed was pushing him along. When he just looks like a Phoenix Gladio project that was set loose on the gay population. So you have these propaganda movies that are covering for technology and conditioning. They are covering for all this with the paranormal, the supernatural. But not only does it seep into Jeffrey Dahmer's life as well as the American psyche, what they are covering with this supernatural bullshit is the very thing that killed Jeffrey Dahmer. Netflix tries to make it like this racial justice thing, and it had nothing to do with that. There's a guy named Christopher Scarver. He's the dude that killed Jeffrey Dahmer. Well, what happened to Christopher Scarver? Christopher Scarver was attacked with voice of God weapons and convinced to kill Jeffrey Dahmer, telling him that he was the chosen one. Yeah, he was chosen. He was chosen to hear the voice. Do you see the metaphors and how deceptive that can be to somebody?
When Scarver was asked why he did what he did, he claimed that he was the chosen one and that he had to do it. Scarver also claimed that the correctional officers knew that he didn't like Jeffrey and that they intentionally had them work together so that he could kill Dahmer.
Now that's what the voices probably told him. We're all working together to get this done, right? That's what they do. They make these people feel like they are part of something that's bigger. It's going on around them. And they'll see little signs or whatever when they're hypervigilant that affirms this in their head. So Scarver gets attacked with voice of God weapons. Dahmer seemed to also be a project. And the Manchurian Candidate goes and kills Dahmer. And it's so similar to The Exorcist 3, which Jeffrey Dahmer was obsessed with, that it's almost unbelievable. But nobody is putting this together. They're not seeing the small pieces, the nuggets, the facts, because it's propped up behind demons and Satanism and skull tables and all the bullshit and theatrics. Both the original Exorcist and The Exorcist 3 were written by the U.S. Air Force's Psychological Warfare Policy Chief. For Christ's sake, I don't care if it's YouTube videos that are being promoted, if it's Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, Paranormal State, any one of these movies out there promoting this crap, all these new movies that are incorporating this crap, Evil, the show, they are psychological operations, every single one of them, covering up for technology and conditioning that is at work and has been at work for decades. And that's it for now. Look out for Charlie.